The cargo freighter UCS Meridian moved slowly through space like a tired old whale swimming through dark water. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge, watching the stars drift past the main window and thinking about how quiet space could be when nothing was trying to kill you. His ship carried food and supplies to the outer colonies, where people tried to make new homes on planets that did not want them there. Jake had been running cargo ships for 15 years, and he thought he had seen everything that space could throw at him. Pirates who wanted his cargo, engine failures in the middle of nowhere, and passengers who caused more trouble than they were worth. But in all those years, he had never had a passenger quite like Henry Collins. The old man had been aboard the Meridian for 3 months now, and Jake still could not figure him out. Henry said he was just a drifter who needed passage to the outer rim and was willing to work for his food and a place to sleep. He did small repair jobs around the ship and never complained about anything. Most passengers made noise and got in but Henry was different. He was so quiet that sometimes Jake forgot he was even there. Henry slept in the cargo bay on a bed he had made from old supply crates and shipping blankets. He kept his few belongings in a small bag that looked like it had seen better days. The old man never talked much beyond saying good morning and thank you for meals. When he did speak, his voice was soft and tired like someone who had been walking for a very long time. First Officer Lisa Jong thought Henry was harmless enough. She had been Jake's second in command for 5 years and was good at reading people. Henry moved slowly, and his hands shook a little when he worked on repairs. She guessed he was maybe 70 years old and just trying to get by like a lot of older folks who ended up on cargo ships when they had nowhere else to go. Engineer Pete Sullivan liked having Henry around because the old man actually knew his way around ship systems. Most passengers could not tell a power coupling from a coffee maker, but Henry could fix things that Pete sometimes struggled with. The old man never got in the way and always cleaned up after himself. Pete thought Henry must have worked on ships before, even though he never talked about his past. Communications Officer Amy Carter was the youngest member of the crew at 24 years old. She felt sorry for Henry because he seemed so alone. Sometimes she would see him staring out the small windows in the cargo bay like he was looking for something he had lost a long time ago. She tried to talk to him a few times, but he always just smiled politely and went back to whatever he was doing. The trouble started when they entered the Kepler sector, where an old nebula made space look like it was full of colored smoke. The nebula was beautiful to look at, but it made navigation tricky because it interfered with their sensors. Jake had been through it before, so he was not worried. What he did not know was that this time would be different. The first sign of trouble came when Amy picked up strange readings on her instruments. The nebula was more active than usual, with electrical charges building up in the gas clouds. She told Jake about it, but he said they would be through the nebula in a few hours, so it should not matter. That was before the ion storm hit. Ion storms were dangerous things that could fry a ship's electronics if you were not careful. This one came out of nowhere, like an angry animal attacking from the dark. 1 minute everything was normal, and next minute the ship was shaking as bolts of energy struck their hull. Jake ordered everyone to emergency stations, while Pete ran to check the main systems. The storm was bigger than anything Jake had ever seen. Lightning jumped between the metal walls of the ship, and the lights flickered on and off. Amy's communications equipment started smoking, and Lisa had to shut down non-essential systems to keep the main power online. Through it all, they could hear the storm getting stronger outside. Henry had been in the cargo bay when the storm started. Jake thought about the old man and hoped he was staying low and keeping away from anything metal. The cargo bay had a lot of equipment that could be dangerous during an electrical storm. Jake wanted to send someone to check on Henry, but he needed all his crew at their stations. Then it happened. A bolt of lightning bigger than any of the others struck the cargo bay with a sound like the universe being torn in half. The lights went out completely, and the ship stopped shaking. For a moment, everything was quiet, except for the sound of Jake's heart beating in his ears. Emergency power came back on and filled the ship with red light. Pete was the first to speak. He said the main systems were still working, but they had lost some equipment in the cargo bay. Jake told Lisa to take the bridge while he went to check on Henry. He expected to find the old man hurt, or maybe worse. Lightning that strong could kill a person instantly. Jake ran through the corridors with a flashlight in his hand. The emergency lighting made everything look like a nightmare, and he could smell burned metal in the air. When he reached the cargo bay, he stopped and stared at something that made no sense at all. Henry Collins stood in the middle of the cargo bay, completely unharmed. Around him, the metal floor had melted into a perfect circle about 10 feet across. Pieces of equipment nearby had been twisted into strange shapes by the heat, but Henry himself looked fine. His clothes were burned and torn, but his skin was not, even scratched. What made Jake's blood run cold was the way Henry looked. For just a moment, the old man's eyes seemed to glow with a light that was not from the emergency power system. His whole body had a faint shine to it, like he was made of something other than flesh and blood. When Henry saw Jake watching him, the sim glow faded, and he became just an old man again. Jake called for the rest of the crew to come to the cargo bay. When they saw the melted circle, and Henry standing unhurt in the middle of it, nobody knew what to say. Pete checked his instruments and said the temperature in that spot was still hot enough to melt steel. Lisa looked at Henry like she was seeing him for the first time. Amy just stared with her mouth open. Henry smiled that same polite smile he always wore and said he must have been very lucky. He said lightning was unpredictable and sometimes did strange things. But Jake had been in space long enough to know that luck did not melt metal floors into perfect circles while leaving a person standing in the middle without a burn on them. Something was very wrong, and Henry Collins was not just an old drifter looking for passage to the outer rim. The storm passed, and the ship returned to normal, but Jake could not stop thinking about what he had seen. As they continued toward their destination, he watched Henry more carefully. The old man went back to his quiet routine of small repairs and polite conversation, but now Jake noticed things he had missed before. The way Henry's hands never really shook when he thought no one was looking. How he sometimes paused while working like he was listening to something no one else could hear. And most disturbing of all, how the ship itself seemed to run better when Henry was around. Henry Collins tried to act like nothing had changed after the lightning strike, but everyone on the Meridian could feel that something was different. The old man still did his repair work and kept to himself, but there was something in his eyes now that had not been there before. When he looked at the ship's systems, it was like he could see things that others could not. Jake Morrison found himself watching Henry more carefully than he had ever watched anyone. The captain had been in space long enough to know when something was not right, and everything about Henry Collins was wrong in ways that made no sense. The man should have been dead after that lightning strike, but instead he seemed more alive than before. The first strange thing Lisa Jong noticed was how well the ship was running. The Meridian was an old cargo hauler that always had problems with something. Usually Pete spent half his time fixing things that should not have broken, and the other half trying to keep systems working that were too old to work properly. But now everything ran like the ship was brand new. The navigation computer that had been giving wrong readings for months suddenly worked perfectly. The air recycling system that made funny noises stopped making any noise at all. Even the food dispensers in the crew quarters began working better than they had when the ship was first built. Lisa had been Jake's first officer long enough to know that ships did not fix themselves. Pete, Sullivan noticed other changes that worried him even more. When he checked the repairs that Henry had made over the past 3 months, he found things that should not exist. Connections between systems that used materials Pete did not recognize. Improvements to the power flow that made the engines run more efficiently than their design specifications said they could. Some of the work looked like it had been done with tools that Pete had never seen before. The strangest thing was that Pete could not figure out how Henry had done the work. The old man only had access to basic repair tools and standard ship supplies, but somehow he had made modifications that would have required equipment that cost more than the Meridian was worth. When Pete asked Henry about it, the old man just smiled and said he had learned a few tricks over the years. Amy Carter was having problems of her own with the communications equipment. Ever since the lightning strike, her instruments picked up signals that should not have been there. At first she thought the storm had damaged something, but when she ran diagnostics, everything tested normal. The signals were not coming from outside the ship, and they were not interference from the ship's own systems. The signals seemed to be coming from somewhere inside the ship, but Amy could not locate the source. They were on frequencies that human technology barely used, and the patterns were unlike anything in her training manuals. Sometimes when Henry was near the communications array, the signals got stronger. Amy started to wonder if the old man was carrying some kind of transmitter, but when she scanned him with her equipment, she found nothing. Jake decided to confront Henry about what was happening. He found the old man in the cargo bay working on a damaged storage unit. Henry looked up when Jake approached, and there was something different about his face. For just a moment, he looked younger, and there was an alertness in his eyes that had not been there before the storm. Jake asked Henry directly what had happened during the lightning strike. He said he knew that normal people did not survive that kind of electrical discharge, and he wanted to know what Henry was hiding. The old man stopped working and looked at Jake for a long time before he answered. Henry said that the lightning had not hurt him because he was not entirely human anymore. He said some storms wake things that were meant to stay sleeping, and that he had been sleeping for a very long time. When Jake asked what he meant, Henry just shook his head and said, "It was complicated." He promised that he was not dangerous to the crew, but he would not explain what he really was. That night, strange things began happening throughout the ship. Lisa was on night watch when she saw Henry walking through the corridors toward the engine room. She thought it was odd, because the old man usually slept through the night, but she did not think much of it. Later, when she checked the security recordings, the cameras showed empty corridors at the exact time she had seen Henry walking through them. Pete found Henry in the engine room the next morning, but the old man claimed he had just woken up in his bed in the cargo bay. When Pete checked the engine systems, he found that someone had made adjustments during the night that improved their efficiency by 15%. The work was so advanced that Pete could not understand how it had been done, even when he was looking right at it. Amy started monitoring Henry more closely with her equipment. She discovered that the mysterious signals got stronger whenever the old man was near any of the ship's main systems. The signals seemed to be some kind of data transmission, but the encryption was unlike anything Amy had ever seen. Sometimes she caught fragments that her computer could almost translate, but the pieces never made complete sense. One fragment mentioned coordinates in a star system that Amy did not recognize. Another talked about something called tactical assessment protocols. A third mentioned what sounded like weapon specifications for technology that did not exist. Amy began to suspect that Henry was not just hiding who he was, but what he was. Called a crew meeting to discuss the situation. He told Lisa, Pete, and Amy about his conversation with Henry and asked them to share what they had observed. When they compared notes, it became clear that Henry Collins was much more than an old drifter looking for passage. The question was whether he was dangerous or just different. Pete argued that Henry had only helped the ship run better and had never done anything to harm anyone. Lisa pointed out that someone who could survive lightning strikes and disappear from security cameras might have abilities that could be dangerous if he chose to use them. Amy was worried about the mysterious signals and what they might mean. Before they could decide what to do about Henry, a priority message came in from Earth Command. Amy's face went white as she read the transmission. She told the others that a fleet of unknown alien ships had been detected moving toward human space. The aliens had ignored all attempts at communication, and their technology was far more advanced than anything humans had ever seen. The message said that the alien ships were scanning human colonies and Earth itself like they were looking for something specific. Military command was mobilizing every available ship, but early reports suggested that human weapons were not effective against the alien technology. The transmission ended with a warning that made Amy's hands shake as she read it aloud. The aliens called themselves the Cleansers, and they had sent a message to Earth Command, saying they had come to eliminate an ancient threat that had awakened among the humans. They would not say what the threat was, but they demanded that humanity surrender it to them or face total destruction. Earth Command had refused and was preparing for war. Jake looked at his crew and then toward the cargo bay, where Henry was probably working on another repair that should have been impossible. The timing was too convenient to be coincidence. An old man who survived lightning strikes and could do things that defied explanation shows up on their ship just before aliens arrive, looking for an ancient threat among humans. Lisa voiced what they were all thinking. She asked if they believed that Henry might be the threat that the aliens were looking for. Pete said that Henry had been nothing but helpful since he came aboard, but Amy pointed out that the mysterious signals might be some kind of beacon that had attracted the aliens to human space. Jake made a decision that would change all their lives. He told his crew that they needed to find out the truth about Henry Collins before the aliens found them. If Henry was the threat that the Cleansers were looking for, then everyone on the Meridian was in danger. But if Henry was something else, something that could help humanity fight against the alien invasion, then they needed to know that as if he had heard their conversation, Henry appeared in the doorway of the bridge. The old man looked at each of them, and there was sadness in his eyes, like he had been expecting this moment for a long time. He said he could hear them talking, and that it was time for him to tell them the truth about who he really was, and why the aliens had come looking for him. Henry asked them to sit down, because what he was going to tell them would be hard to believe. He said his real name was Admiral Henry Collins, and that he had been fighting aliens for longer than any of them had been alive. The lightning strike had awakened memories that had been sleeping inside him for 800 years, and now the war he thought was over was about to begin again. Henry Collins sat down slowly in the chair that Jake offered him and looked at each member of the crew before he began to speak. His voice was different now, stronger and more certain than the quiet old man they had known for 3 months. When he started talking about his past, it was like listening to someone else entirely. He told them that 800 years ago, humanity had made first contact with an alien race called the Vortai. The meeting had not gone well because the Vortai believed that humans were a disease that needed to be removed from the galaxy. They had technology that was thousands of years more advanced than anything humans had ever seen, and they used it to attack Earth and the early colonies without warning. The war that followed was unlike anything in human history. The Vortai could travel between stars and ships that looked like living creatures. Their weapons could destroy entire planets, and their soldiers could not be killed by normal means. Humanity was losing badly, and Earth Command knew that without something extraordinary, the human race would be extinct within a few years. That was when the experimental program began. Human scientists had managed to capture some Vortai technology during a battle, and they discovered that it was not entirely mechanical. Parts of it were alive in ways that human science could not explain. The aliens seemed to merge their own bodies with their machines to create weapons and ships that were more than the sum of their parts. Earth Command decided to try the same thing with human volunteers. They called it the Enhancement Program, and they asked for soldiers who were willing to risk everything to save humanity. Henry had been a young admiral then, barely 30 years old, and he volunteered because he believed it was the only way to win the war. The process was dangerous, and most of the volunteers died during the procedure. The alien technology had to be grafted into their bodies at the cellular level, and their minds had to be altered to interface with systems that human brains were never meant to control. Out of 100 volunteers, only 12 survived, and Henry was the most successful. The enhanced soldiers could do things that seemed impossible. They could interface directly with any technology just by touching it. Their bodies no longer aged normally, and they could survive injuries that would kill regular humans. Most importantly, they could understand and control Vortai technology better than the aliens themselves. Henry became the leader of the enhanced soldiers, and they turned the tide of the war. They could take control of enemy ships and use them against their former owners. They could predict Vortai tactics because the alien technology in their bodies gave them insights into how the enemy thought. Within 5 years, the Vortai were defeated and their surviving ships fled to unknown parts of the galaxy. But victory came with a terrible price. The enhanced soldiers were no longer entirely human, and they found it hard to live normal lives. After the war ended, some of them began to see regular humans as weak and inferior. Others became obsessed with finding and destroying any remaining Vortai in the galaxy. Earth Command realized that their greatest weapons might become their greatest threat. The decision was made to put the surviving enhanced soldiers into a form of suspended animation. Their memories were suppressed, and they were scattered across the galaxy with false identities. They were told they were just regular people, and their enhanced abilities were locked away deep in their minds. Earth Command called it the Final Protocol, and it was designed to keep the enhanced soldiers asleep until humanity needed them again. Henry had been sleeping for 800 years, drifting from ship to ship and planet to planet as an old man who thought he was just another drifter looking for work. The lightning strike on the Meridian had disrupted the suppression systems in his mind, and now his memories and abilities were coming back piece by piece. Lisa asked Henry why the aliens were coming back now after so many years. Henry explained that the Vortai who had fled the galaxy had spent centuries rebuilding their forces and breeding new generations who knew only hatred for humanity. They called themselves the Cleansers now, and they had been searching for the enhanced soldiers ever since the war ended. The problem was that Henry's awakening had sent out a signal that could be detected across the galaxy. Every enhanced soldier had technology in their body that connected them to the others, and when one woke up, it alerted any aliens who knew how to look for the signal. The Cleansers had been waiting for this moment for 800 years. Pete asked Henry about the repairs he had been making to the ship. Henry smiled sadly and admitted that he had been preparing the Meridian for what was coming, even before he fully remembered who he was. His subconscious mind had been slowly upgrading the ship's systems with Vortai technology that was stored in his body. The Meridian was no longer just a cargo hauler. It was becoming a warship. Amy wanted to know about the signals she had been detecting. Henry explained that his body was constantly communicating with technology around him, and sometimes those communications leaked into the ship's systems. He could not control it completely because his abilities were still returning gradually. Some of the signals were his body trying to interface with the ship's computers, and others were automatic distress calls being sent to the other enhanced soldiers. Jake asked the most important question of all. He wanted to know if there were other enhanced soldiers out there, and whether they could help fight the cleansers. Henry's expression became very sad as he answered. He said that most of the enhanced soldiers were probably dead after 800 years. The suppression systems were not perfect, and some of them would have failed over the centuries. However, Henry believed that a few might still be alive and sleeping in hidden locations around the galaxy. The problem was finding them before the cleansers did. If the aliens captured an enhanced soldier, they could use the technology in their body to locate all the others. Earth Command had built failsafes into the program, but Henry was not sure if they would still work after so many years. The crew sat in silence for several minutes, trying to process what Henry had told them. Finally, Jake asked what they should do now. Henry said they had two choices. They could try to reach Earth and warn the military about what was really coming, or they could try to find the other enhanced soldiers and wake them up before it was too late, before anyone could answer. Alarms began sounding throughout the ship. Amy ran to her communications console, and her face went white as she read the displays. She told the others that 3 large ships had just dropped out of hyperspace nearby, and they were heading straight for the Meridian. The ships were unlike anything in human databases, and they were broadcasting a message on all frequencies. The message was short and delivered in perfect English by a voice that sounded like grinding glass. It said that the cleansers had found the abomination they were looking for and demanded that the crew of the Meridian surrender it to them immediately. If they complied, their deaths would be quick. If they resisted, the entire ship would be torn apart slowly while they were still alive. Henry stood up and walked to the main display, where images of the alien ships were visible. The vessels looked like they were made of living metal that pulsed with its own light. They were beautiful and terrifying at the same time, and they were 3 times larger than the Meridian. Jake asked Henry if there was any way they could fight ships like that. Henry placed his hand on the main control console, and his palm began to glow with the same light they had seen after the lightning strike. Throughout the ship systems began activating that had never existed before. Weapons ports opened in the hull, and the engines began producing power levels that should have been impossible. Henry looked at Jake with eyes that were no longer entirely human. He told the crew that the Meridian was about to become something that the galaxy had not seen for 800 years. A human warship enhanced with Vorti technology and commanded by someone who knew exactly how to use it. The cleansers had been hunting for him across the galaxy, but they had forgotten something important about the enhanced soldiers. They had been created to destroy aliens who thought they were superior to humanity. The Vorti had learned that lesson 800 years ago, and now it was time for the cleansers to learn it too. Henry asked Jake if he and his crew were willing to help him remind the galaxy why humans were the most dangerous species that had ever evolved. Jake looked at his crew and saw determination in their faces despite their fear. Lisa nodded and took her position at the tactical station. Pete ran to engineering to monitor the new systems that were coming online. Amy began scanning the alien ships to gather intelligence for the coming battle. They were just 4 humans and 1 enhanced soldier against 3 alien warships, but they were not going to surrender without a fight. Henry smiled for the first time since his awakening, and it was not the polite smile of an old drifter. It was the smile of a predator who had been sleeping for a very long time and was finally ready to hunt again. The 3 cleanser ships moved through space like predators closing in on wounded prey. Their hulls gleamed with an organic light that pulsed in rhythm like a heartbeat, and their weapons ports glowed with energy that made the stars around them look dim. Captain Jake Morrison had seen a lot of things in his years running cargo through dangerous space, but nothing had ever made his blood run cold like the sight of those alien vessels. Henry Collins stood at the main control console with both hands pressed against its surface and his whole body glowing with the same strange light they had seen after the lightning strike. Around them, the Meridian was transforming in ways that defied everything Jake knew about starship design. Weapons emerged from hidden compartments in the hull, while the engines began producing energy readings that should have torn the ship apart. The communication system crackled to life with another message from the cleansers. This time, the voice sounded different, older, and filled with hatred that had been growing for centuries. It told them that they had 60 seconds to surrender the abomination, or watch their ship be dissected piece by piece while they screamed for mercy that would never come. Henry looked up from the console, and his eyes were no longer the tired eyes of an old drifter. They glowed with intelligence and purpose that seemed ancient beyond measure. He told Jake that the cleansers had made a mistake coming here with only 3 ships. 800 years ago, it would have taken at least 20 vessels to have a chance against an enhanced human soldier, and he was just getting started. Lisa. Zhang took her position at what had been the navigation station, but was now displaying tactical information that showed every detail of the approaching alien ships. She called out readings that made no sense according to everything she knew about space combat. The cleanser vessels were using some kind of phase technology that let them exist partially outside normal space, and their weapons operated on principles that human science had never discovered. Pete Sullivan was in the engine room watching displays that showed systems he had never seen before coming online throughout the ship. The fusion reactor that had been struggling to provide basic power was now generating energy levels that could supply a small city. New conduits were growing through the ship's structure, like living veins carrying power to weapons and defenses. That had not existed an hour ago. Amy Carter monitored communications and sensor data while trying to understand how the Meridian was doing things that should have been impossible. Her equipment was picking up signals from inside the ship that suggested Henry was interfacing directly with every system at once. The alien technology that had been sleeping in his body for 8 centuries was finally fully awake. The first cleanser ship fired without warning. A beam of energy that looked like liquid light struck the Meridian's hull and should have cut through it like a knife through paper. Instead, the beam spread across the ship's surface and was absorbed into the hull plating that had somehow become a living metal capable of converting enemy weapons into additional power for their own systems. Henry's response was immediate and devastating. The Meridian fired weapons that had never appeared on any human ship design. Beams of pure energy that could phase through matter struck the cleanser vessel and began tearing it apart from the inside. The alien ship's living hull tried to repair itself, but Henry's weapons were designed specifically to prevent that kind of regeneration. Jake watched in amazement as his cargo hauler moved through space with grace and speed that made it seem like a completely different ship. Henry was piloting the Meridian with his mind, while simultaneously controlling every weapon and defensive system. The old man's body remained perfectly still, but Jake could see the strain on his face as he fought a battle that was being waged on multiple levels at once. The second and third cleanser ships attacked together using coordinated tactics that had been developed over centuries of warfare. Their weapons created fields of distorted space-time that should have torn the Meridian apart at the molecular level. But Henry had been fighting aliens who used similar technology 800 years ago, and he knew exactly how to counter their attacks. The battle became a deadly dance between the small human ship and the massive alien vessels. The cleansers had superior numbers and firepower, but Henry had something they did not expect. He understood their technology better than they did because it was similar to the Vartai systems that had been integrated into his body during the enhancement program. Lisa called out tactical information as fast as she could process it, but the battle was moving at speeds that made normal space combat look like slow motion. Henry was predicting the aliens' moves seconds before they made them and positioning the Meridian to take advantage of weaknesses in their formations that no regular human would have been able to see. The first cleanser ship exploded in a burst of light that briefly outshone the nearby star. The alien vessel's living hull convulsed as it died and sent out a psychic scream that made everyone on the bridge feel sick to their stomachs. Henry showed no reaction to the alien death cry, but Jake noticed that the glow around the old man's body was getting brighter and more intense. Pete reported from engineering that the ship's systems were operating far beyond their design limits, but somehow holding together. The alien technology that Henry was using seemed to be reinforcing the Meridian structure and upgrading its components in real time. The ship was becoming something that was part human engineering and part alien biotechnology. Amy detected something in the communications from the remaining cleanser ships that made her hands shake as she reported it to the others. The aliens were not just trying to destroy them anymore. They were calling for reinforcements and transmitting detailed scans of Henry's abilities to ships throughout their fleet. The battle they were fighting was just the beginning of something much larger. The second cleanser ship changed tactics and began using weapons that attacked the mind rather than the body. Psychic assaults that could drive human beings insane struck the Meridian, but bounced off shields that Henry had erected around the ship. The old man's face showed pain as he fought off mental attacks while continuing to pilot the ship and control its weapons. Jake realized that each time Henry used his abilities, he was becoming less human and more like the weapon he had been designed to be 800 years ago. The old drifter who had slept in their cargo bay was disappearing and being replaced by something that was built for one purpose: destroying aliens who threatened humanity. The third cleanser ship tried to escape when it became clear that the battle was not going as planned. But Henry was not going to let any of them leave to report back to their fleet. The Meridian moved to intercept with speed that should have crushed everyone aboard under crushing acceleration. But somehow, the ship's systems compensated for forces that would normally be lethal. Henry's final attack on the fleeing cleanser ship was different from the others. Instead of using weapons, he reached out with his mind and took control of the alien vessel's own systems. Jake watched in horror as the cleanser ship turned its weapons on itself and began tearing itself apart from the inside while its crew screamed over the communications channels. When the last alien ship exploded, Henry collapsed at the control console. The glow around his body faded, and for a moment he looked like the old man they had known before the lightning strike. But when he looked up at Jake, his eyes held knowledge and memories that were older than any human civilization. Henry told them that the battle was over, but the war was just beginning. The 3 ships they had destroyed were scouts sent ahead of a much larger force. His awakening had alerted every cleanser ship in the galaxy, and they would all be coming to finish what their ancestors had started 800 years ago. Pete reported that the ship's enhanced systems were stable, but Henry's condition was deteriorating. Using his abilities at full power was burning out the human parts of his brain and replacing them with alien technology. If the process continued, he would become a weapon without any humanity left to guide it. Amy picked up long-range communications that confirmed Henry's worst fears. Hundreds of cleanser ships were moving toward human space from all directions. Earth's military forces were preparing to fight, but they had no idea what they were really facing. The aliens had spent 8 centuries preparing for this moment, and they had weapons that could destroy entire star systems. Henry struggled to stand and walked slowly to the main display where star charts showed the positions of human colonies throughout the galaxy. He told them that there was only one chance to save humanity from complete extinction. Somewhere in the galaxy, the other enhanced soldiers were still sleeping, and if they could be awakened in time, they might be able to fight back against the cleanser fleet. The problem was that Henry's memories were still incomplete, and he could only remember fragments of where the other soldiers had been hidden. The process of awakening them would be dangerous because it required specific equipment that might not still exist after 800 years. Even worse, the act of waking the enhanced soldiers would send out signals that would tell the cleansers exactly where to find them. Jake looked at his crew and saw that they were all thinking the same thing. They were just four regular. Jake Morrison made the hardest decision of his life while staring at star charts that showed the approaching cleanser fleet. Earth Command would call them deserters for abandoning their cargo run, but humanity needed the other enhanced soldiers more than it needed another shipment of supplies to the outer colonies. He told Henry that the crew of the Meridian would help him find the sleeping weapons, even if it meant they might never see home again. Henry Collins smiled with genuine gratitude. For the first time since his awakening, but Jake could see that each hour was making the old man less human than before. The alien technology in Henry's body was slowly taking over his mind and replacing his memories with tactical data and weapon specifications. Soon there might be nothing left of the drifter who had slept in their cargo bay for 3 months. The coordinates Henry remembered led them to a dead star system that did not appear on any modern navigation charts. According to his fragmented memories, the location had been chosen because it was so far from normal shipping lanes that no one would ever find it by accident. The system contained the remains of planets that had been shattered by some ancient catastrophe and left floating in space as broken chunks of rock and metal. Lisa Zhang piloted the Meridian through the debris field using enhanced sensors that could detect things no human instrument should have been able to see. The ship moved between massive pieces of destroyed worlds while Henry searched for signals that had been hidden for 800 years. His connection to the ship's systems was so complete now that he barely seemed aware of his physical body. They found the facility buried deep inside the core of what had once been the system's largest planet. The installation was protected by camouflage technology that made it invisible to normal scans, but Henry's enhanced abilities could see through the deception. When they got closer, they discovered that the facility was still active after all these centuries, powered by energy sources that human science had never fully understood. Pete Sullivan monitored the ship's systems as they approached the hidden base, and he could hardly believe what his instruments were telling him. The facility was generating power levels that rivaled a small star, and it was doing so without any visible fuel source or reactor. The technology that had built this place was so far beyond current human capabilities that it might as well have been magic. Amy Carter detected automated defense systems that came online as the Meridian approached the facility. Ancient weapons that had been waiting for 800 years began tracking their ship, but Henry sent identification codes that made the defenses recognize him as authorized personnel. The facility's computers welcomed him back in a voice that sounded like it had been recorded before any of them were born. The docking bay that opened to receive them was large enough to hold a dozen ships the size of the Meridian. As they landed, Jake could see that the facility extended far into the planet's core, with corridors and chambers that seemed to go on forever. Emergency lighting activated throughout the installation, as if it had been waiting all this time for someone to return. Henry led them through passages lined with technology that looked like it had grown rather than been built. The walls seemed to pulse with their own life, and the floor felt warm under their feet, like they were walking through the body of some enormous sleeping creature. Jake had been in a lot of strange places during his years in space, but nothing had ever felt as alien as this facility the humans had supposedly built. They reached the central chamber where 12 stasis pods stood in a circle around a control center that hummed with barely contained energy. Henry approached each pod with growing sadness, because 8 of them contained only the remains of enhanced soldiers who had died during their long sleep. The stasis systems had failed over the centuries, and their occupants had aged to dust while dreaming of wars that had ended long ago. But 4 of the pods still showed signs of life. Inside them, Jake could see figures that looked human, but somehow different in ways that were hard to define. Like Henry, they had been changed by the enhancement process, and their bodies had been kept alive. a technology that was part human and part alien. Henry began the awakening sequence with hands that shook not from age, but from the knowledge of what he was about to unleash. The first to wake was Commander Sarah Price, who had been enhanced with the ability to manipulate matter at the molecular level. She opened her eyes and looked around the chamber with confusion that quickly turned to alertness as her memories returned. When she saw Henry, she smiled sadly and asked how long they had been sleeping. Lieutenant Dan Murphy emerged from his pod. Next, and Jake immediately saw that something was wrong with him. The man seemed to flicker in and out of existence, like a bad hologram, and when he spoke his voice came from multiple directions at once. His enhancement had given him the ability to exist in several locations simultaneously, but the long sleep had made the ability unstable. Captain Mary Johnson was the third to wake, and the temperature in the chamber dropped by several degrees when she opened her eyes. Her enhancement allowed her to manipulate time itself in small ways, and the stasis process had somehow amplified her abilities. She looked at the others and spoke in a voice that seemed to come from the past and future at the same time. The last pod contained Major Rick Davis, whose enhancement let him phase between dimensions. When he woke up, parts of his body kept disappearing and reappearing as if he could not control which reality he wanted to exist in. All four of the awakened soldiers showed signs that their long sleep had changed them in ways that even the original enhancement process had not anticipated. Henry explained the situation to his fellow enhanced soldiers while Jake and his crew watched in amazement. These were the weapons that had saved humanity 800 years ago, but they looked like people who had been broken by forces beyond their understanding. Jake began to wonder if waking them had been a mistake. Sarah Price was the first to fully regain her composure, and she immediately began accessing the facility's computers to assess the current threat. Her ability to manipulate matter extended to electronic systems, and she could interface with the ancient technology even more easily than Henry. What she found in the data banks made her face go pale with fear. The cleanser fleet was larger than any of them had imagined, with over 1,000 ships moving toward human space from all directions. Worse yet, the aliens had spent 8 centuries developing new weapons specifically designed to kill enhanced humans. They had learned from their ancestors' defeat and were prepared for everything the enhanced soldiers had used against the Vortai. Mary Johnson used her time manipulation abilities to look into possible futures, and what she saw was not encouraging. In most timelines, humanity was completely extinct within months, regardless of what the enhanced soldiers did. The few futures where humans survived required sacrifices that none of them wanted to make. Henry revealed the final terrible secret that he had remembered during his awakening. The enhanced soldiers had not just been weapons against alien threats, but also safeguards against humanity itself. If humans ever became a danger to other species in the galaxy, the enhanced soldiers were programmed to eliminate their own kind. The cleansers knew about this failsafe and were trying to activate it. Rick Davis phased partially out of normal reality and reported that he could see cleanser infiltration teams moving through human space. The aliens were not just planning a military assault, but also a psychological warfare campaign designed to trigger the enhanced soldiers' programming against humanity. If they succeeded, the greatest weapons humanity had ever created would become its destroyers. Sarah Price made a decision that shocked everyone in the chamber. She began overriding the failsafe programming in all the enhanced soldiers using her matter manipulation abilities to rewrite the alien technology in their bodies. The process was incredibly dangerous and could kill them all, but it was the only way to ensure they would fight for humanity instead of against it. The override procedure required Henry to serve as a conduit for the reprogramming, and the strain was more than his already deteriorating condition could handle. As Sarah worked to free them from their programmed limitations, Henry's body began to burn out from the inside. He was sacrificing what remained of his humanity to give the others a chance to save their species. When the process was complete, Henry collapsed and his body began to glow with the same light they had seen during the lightning strike. But this time the light was not fading, and Jake realized that Henry Collins the Drifter was gone forever. What remained was something that was more than human, but less than alive. A living weapon that existed only to protect humanity from threats it could not face alone. The four awakened enhanced. Soldiers took command of separate sections of the facility and began preparing for the war that was coming. They would scatter across the galaxy to organize resistance against the Cleanser invasion, while Henry remained at the facility as its guardian. The old man who had slept on their ship was now something else entirely, but his sacrifice had given humanity a chance to survive. Jake, Morrison, and his crew returned to the Meridian, knowing that they had witnessed the end of one story and the beginning of another. The galaxy was vast and dangerous, but humanity now had protectors.